Today, we are surrounded by the consequences of degeneration: flooding, extreme drought, fires, habitat loss, extreme temperatures, and failing crops. We keep trying to sustain what's broken, but it's not enough. As a farmer, I have hope because the solution is right under our feet: our soil. I know that together we can regenerate America. Regenerative farming starts with rebuilding the soil, but it doesn't stop there. Combining indigenous knowledge, holistic management, and cutting-edge science, regenerative agriculture improves food quality and security, increases farmers' prosperity, and repairs land function, providing countless environmental solutions. So how do we make regenerative agriculture the norm?
The Farm Bill. Despite its name, it goes far beyond farming. This taxpayer-funded bill, costing a whopping $856 billion, dictates how and what we eat, the purity of our air and water, and the management of over half of our nation's land. It impacts all of us daily and future generations to come. The current Farm Bill does not do enough to support all farmers and ranchers in their transition to regenerative agriculture. And each year, we are still losing an equivalent of 4 pickup trucks full of topsoil per acre. My fellow American farmers and ranchers are ready to move towards regeneration, but we need the Farm Bill's resources and support to do it.
Regenerate America is bringing together an unprecedented coalition of farmers, businesses, nonprofits, individuals from every corner of our country and all political stripes. Together, we are making sure farmers like me and the people we feed get as much voice and representation in D.C. as corporate agribusiness. If you believe in a healthy, abundant future
for yourself,
your family,
and your community,
join us in calling for strong support for regenerative agriculture in the Farm Bill.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the discussion focused on soil and water. I'm Nosheen Majid, a microbiologist by training, a Sierra Club a volunteer, and a member of the Manitou Creek Watershed Alliance. Today, we want to focus on conservation programs in the Farm Bill, why we environmentalists care about it, what it is, what conservation incentives are offered to farmers under the Farm Bill, and also the state agriculture programs. So between 70 to 80% of water is used for farming, and the impact of all the chemical use that are being used are having an enormous impact on watersheds, rivers, lakes, and seas. People living in lakes and rivers, as well as coastlines in all 50 states, face harmful algal blooms, also known as HABs. And these HABs, they produce extremely dangerous toxins that can sicken or even kill people and animals. They also create dead zones in the water, as we see in Gulf of Mexico. They raise treatment costs for drinking water and also hurt industries that depend on clean recreational water. Water usage exceeds the regenerative capacity of aquifers and rivers, as we are already seeing that is visible around the country. Communities see that their water and wells are drying out because groundwater is being depleted for livestock and irrigation and to irrigate crops. But so like basically like the groundwater is being depleted faster than it can replenish. And because our farmers are the first line of defense to shift into regenerative forms of farming, to restore soil back to health, we want to focus on regenerative forms of farming. And to add on to that, I just wanted to say, like, for every 1% of carbon matter or organic matter added to soil, it can hold an additional 20,000 gallons of water per acre. Healthy soil requires lower levels of fertilizers, and also natural defense against pests. So Klaus Mager is a member of the Sierra Club Food and Agriculture Grassroots Network, and he's going to moderate this discussion with an amazing panel. Klaus, please take it from here, starting with an introduction of the panel.
Yeah, thank you, Nosheen, and welcome everyone to this discussion here. Our panel today is Kevin Green and Paul Overby, both are farmers. Grant Hammer is the Executive Director of the Association of Illinois Soil and Water Conservation Districts. We have Wendy Miller from the USDA Farm Services. She's the Illinois State Office Chief Conservation Compliance Specialist. And Mary Podol from USDA Natural Resources Conservation Services. She's the State Conservationist for North Dakota. So we'll start today with introductions and an overview of the federal and state conservation programs that are in place and how they are organized. Then we thought that Paul and Kevin, our farmers, are going to describe a hypothetical new form that we just acquired with neglected and completely depleted soils to help us understand what is a regenerative transition. How do you repair soil and water back to health in a depleted farm? How does that work? So we will then turn back to our panel to ask which of the conservation programs can be applied to assist with both advice and funding. We also have a team fielding your feedback and questions in the Q&A. We're using the chat for the panel. So please upvote questions you see and want answered. Now, if you see a question that is one that you're interested in, vote it up, makes it easier for us to respond. So let's go ahead and start with introductions and overview. And maybe we'll start with Kevin. Can you please tell us about your farm and the types of crops you're growing, how many acres you manage, and so on? Let's go ahead, Kevin.
Okay, well, good afternoon. Thank you for allowing me to be here. I'm a member of the Prairie Group of the Illinois Sierra Club. Our family farm is a 640-acre centennial farm established by my great-grandfather in 1891 and located near Champaign, Illinois. Our farm is situated on a watershed divide. Half of our water goes to the Ohio River, and the other half goes to the Illinois River, both of which end up in the Mississippi. In our township, just north of our farm, is an area where the glaciers stop. There's a terminal moraine, an entirely different world from where we farm down here on the prairie. And then just south of us is where the small tributaries of all the rivers begin. On our farm, annually, we plant 200 acres of corn, 200 acres of soybeans, rotate them every year. We have about 200 acres enrolled in the 10-year Conservation Reserve Program, specifically pollinator habitat. And we have 40 acres of trees enrolled in the Illinois Forestry Development Program. Looking back, I first became aware of the need for conservation practices during the 1980s and 90s. At that time, fence lines and tree rows were disappearing rapidly. Fields were plowed in the fall and were tilled numerous times in the spring in preparation of a seed bed. I remember one hot, dry, windy spring morning, I noticed a dark band on the western horizon. And I watched as it appeared to be getting larger and closer. And it was then that I realized it was a huge wall of windblown dirt, reminiscent of the Dust Bowl days. I couldn't believe it. It was just filling the sky. So that's the point where we began our journey on implementing conservation practices, such as reduced tillage, conservation tillage, mulch tillage, and now no-till. And that's when we also started enrolling in the Conservation Reserve Program. So practices we're currently using on our farm include no-till, cover crops, split nitrogen application, soil and tissue testing, controlled water table management. We planted windbreaks and waterways, and we're developing wildlife habitat. So in summary, that's our farm. Thank you.
Hey, thank you, Kevin. Okay, Paul, can you come on next?
Thank you, everyone. It's great to be here and share the time together with you. I've asked for a few slides that I put together to be shown because my wife and I are, Diane and I are in our 30th year of farming in the Northern Great Plains near Wolford, North Dakota, north central North Dakota. And we raise some crops that you might not be familiar with. We raise canola, field peas, spring wheat, oats, flax, sunflowers, and sometimes soybeans. And we grow all of those in a rotation to provide diversity to our soil and to our farm management. Next slide, please. We adopted no-till farming in 2005. And since 2006, we also manage all of our fields by subdividing them into smaller zones, nutrient management zones for variable rate application. Cover crops have been kind of a challenge for us in the Northern Great Plains. And a few years ago, I led a project on behalf of the Northern Plains RC&D Council that was funded by USDA NRCS to explore how we can better plant cover crops in our area and make them a part of our system. Yesterday, we had a tour on our farm looking at some of our regenerative practices that we do, including cover crops that were interseeded into wheat, similar to what you see here. We've also added buffer strips around many of our wetlands that we use for hayland and sometimes just for wildlife benefit. We've been working on intercropping peas and oats and sunflowers and pollinators, as well as other types of crops. And we're enrolled in the General Mills Regenerative Ag Program for the last 3 or 4 years. We have some of our land is pasture and hayland. We rotationally graze all of our pasture land. Some of the hayland is on low productivity soils. And so we put those to better use by hay, and sometimes we put them into CRP. We've used EQIP programs and CSP programs as well. And you're going to hear more about what all those initials mean later on this evening. We also sell carbon credits to Indigo Ag, so kind of a totality of what we're attempting to do on our farm. I've been a board member on the Manitoba North Dakota Zero-Till Farmers Association, and I'm currently serving as a supervisor on the Rolette County Soil Conservation District. Next slide, please. And we do all of this for a variety of reasons. Paramount is soil health, getting the roots and the soil built up to sustain life and restore the capacity of the soil back to what it was on the prairies before it was ever broken up. And then along with that, provides the quality of water. We've been maintaining our wetlands, improving our wetlands. We like to see all the wildlife that we raise that we've been blessed with, and we've been working on programs to increase the pollinators that we have on our farm. Diane and I take pretty seriously our responsibility as stewards to take care of the land that we've been blessed to take care of. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, appreciate it. So now let's turn to our panel representing federal and state conservation programs. And Mary, can we bring you up first? And let's go ahead and start with introduction and overview. We have your PowerPoint keyed up here.
Thank you, Klaus. The Natural Resource Conservation Service, a part of the United States Department of Agriculture, has a long history of helping people help the land. The conservation accomplishments in the United States, however, would not be possible without our conservation partners, such as those you're going to meet tonight, and our farmers and ranchers. Good evening, everyone. My name is Mary Podol. I serve as the state conservationist for USDA NRCS, Natural Resources Conservation Service, here in North Dakota. I have a comprehensive conservation program. I am responsible for leading my staff and implementing the Farm Bill program. Particularly the conservation title that we're going to talk about this evening. I'm also responsible for ensuring that technical assistance is available to our farmers, ranchers, and communities throughout North Dakota to help identify resource concerns such as soil erosion or water quality issues and help find solutions. I'm looking forward to discussing tonight and networking with the farmers and the others on the line tonight. Next slide, please. So today we are going to focus on what's in the toolbox to help with water management, with soil erosion, and basically sustaining and improving our natural resources. And in particular, I've been asked to talk about the Farm Bill, what it is, and who implements that, and a little bit about the programs that can help our farmers and ranchers. So the Farm Bill, since 1933, every 4 or 5 years, tells us it's the law that gives us our national priorities for all of the things that you see in this pie chart, from nutrition, which includes ample and adequate, healthy, and safe food, to helping our farmers and ranchers with insurance and commodity programs, and several other things that include agriculture research. And tonight we're going to talk about that 7% conservation. It is for everybody. Everybody eats. We want to keep fair and reasonable prices for our consumers, and we want our farmers to be able to also make a living. So the conservation title contains the programs that encourage farmers to voluntarily implement resource conserving practices on private lands. And you're going to hear from Paul and Kevin tonight about some of the things that they are already doing. The nature of the land, the landscape, is important to all citizens. It means healthy soil, clean water, and the Farm Bill helps us do this. However, it's not just the feds. While USDA, NRCS, and other Department of Ag agencies are given the authority and responsibility, conservation is truly a locally led effort. Next slide, please. There is a core of agencies and groups that help deliver the Farm Bill and deliver stewardship and conservation. Many of these are represented today on this webinar. In 1930, Hugh Hammond Bennett, a leader for telling the country's leaders that soil erosion was a problem, he also knew that the government or people, our farmers and ranchers and communities, would not like the government telling them what to do. Imagine that. I don't think that's changed much today. The dream of having federal support needs local buy-in, and that's where, as you see from this slide, it's the United States Department of Agriculture with Rural Development, Natural Resource Conservation Service, Farm Service Agency, just being 3, but it also includes state agencies, the state conservation. Every state has some type of conservation entity at the state level. There's a conservation association that helps the local boards of soil and water conservation districts, of which you heard Paul is a board member for his. And another member of that core partnership around in 1962 was Resource Conservation and Development, which really focuses on communities and what the natural resource concerns are within a community. Next slide, please. So in addition to federal agencies, state agencies, local soil and water conservation districts, conservation is a locally led effort that has a partnership need for everyone. There are groups such as Pheasants Forever, Sierra Club, Ducks Unlimited, Audubon. I can't even begin to name all of them that are part of the delivery of Farm Bill. Next slide, please. So some of the programs in the Farm Bill are the Conservation Reserve Program, which you will hear more about from Wendy, the Conservation Stewardship Program, the Environmental Quality Incentive Program, Farmland Protection, Regional Conservation Partnership Program, which I am going to come back to at the very end of my presentation. We have easements to protect wetlands, we have watershed programs, and we have water bank. Now, all of those have their acronyms and we tend to use them: CSP, CRP, FRP. So as we talk with you today, we are probably going to slip and use an acronym. And we like to blame that on the government. But ever since Pooh and Tigger said, ta-ta for now, and it became TT and FN, acronyms are just a thing. So I'd like to point out to you at the bottom of this slide, and you will be able to get a recording of this after we are done tonight. There is a place that you can go to actually see these acronyms and a whole lot more. But the bottom line for our farmers, ranchers, and communities, to understand these Farm Bill programs and how they can be used is really quite simple. Next slide. And that's visiting your local conservationist. We have offices in over 3,000 counties and units in the United States and territories. And along with soil conservation districts, my staff and RCS employees have a variety of discipline knowledge, from agronomy and managing nutrients to soil scientists who help develop the Web Soil Survey, plant biologists who understands both weeds and crop sciences, and then wildlife and rangeland plants. So to help you get into what the Farm Bill programs that offer cost share for conservation programs, they offer incentives when a farmer is trying to do something new. You heard both our farmers talk about cover crops. The farm that has been implementing a rotation and goes into changing their behaviors, changing what practices they are implementing, there is some risk. They might have a bad year. They might lose crops because the cover crop was seeded too thickly. So incentives allow for that risk, for farmers to take a risk, to change their management behaviors, to improve their and sustain natural resources. So there are incentive programs. And then there are programs such as CRP, Conservation Reserve Program, that allow to put certain marginal cropland aside for 10 years to allow the soil health to develop. But again, it really is simple. Get the conservation plan. Or if you're not a farmer and rancher, but you identify a concern, a water quality concern, go to the local office. Those conservationists there will help you identify all of the different programs available in the Farm Bill, or those through our partners, such as the Soil and Water Conservation District, or even those such as Sierra Club. They'll be able to help you write that plan and point you in the right direction for cost share and technical assistance. They'll be able to help you implement a soil erosion prevention measure. They will prescribe to you a grass planting or a rotation for soil organic matter and improvement and so forth. Next slide, please. So again, locally led, the Farm Bill gives us the tools to have lots of different types of financial and technical assistance for our farmers and ranchers. But it truly is locally led. It's your voice and your support to the Farm Bill. Help identify what's important to you. Water quality. Is it recreation? Is it drinking? There are things you can do to create a network, to create a friendship. In NRCS, we have the Earth Team, volunteer. Many of you have expertise that I may not have on my staff, such as an economist or maybe water quality. We work closely with the state Department of Environmental Quality because they have that expertise while I do not. But as I implement a conservation program, I have the responsibility to make sure that I can help my farmers and ranchers obtain that technical assistance. Educate. We've got to keep educating about how important our soil and water is. And more, we need grant writers. In addition to Farm Bill monies, many of that comes down through a partner or a community identifying the resource concerns and how they would like to get it fixed. And that means that's how we get money to a conservation or for regenerative agriculture in a community. Help write those grants. And that brings me back to RCPP, the Regional Conservation Partnership Program. Those monies are not delivered to a community or to a state without a healthy partnership between the federal agencies, the state departments of natural resources, and our local farmers and ranchers. So that's how you yourselves can get involved. So remember, locally led, it's your voice, it's your support. Thank you very much for your time this afternoon.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mary. That was a great overview. Let's bring on Wendy next. Please, Wendy, now tell us about your department and your efforts here.
Thank you, Klaus. Good evening, everyone from Southern Illinois. I am Wendy Miller, the Chief Program Specialist in the Illinois State Farm Service Agency office. I've worked with the agency for 40 years, and of those years, I worked in the county office, working directly with the operators and landowners, trying to sign them up for USDA Farm Service Agency programs. And with these programs, we partner with several different agencies. We look at NRCS and the soil and water districts as our partners to give us technical servicing and help educate the producers to know what to plant, when to plant it, and what programs are the best for their ground. Next slide. So the several different programs that we have are consisted under the Conservation Reserve Program that we administer, we provide the funds to, but we always lean to the NRCS offices and the soil and water districts to help us make sure that we implement the practices in the correct manner. Of our core programs, we have the General and Continuous Conservation Reserve Program. We have the Conservation Reserve Grasslands Program, the Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program, and I'll get into that a little bit because that's a little bit more specific. The Clean Lakes, Estuaries, and Rivers 30 program, and the Forestry Management Incentive Program. Besides these, there are several more programs, but these are the highlights of the Conservation Reserve programs that we offer. Next slide. So to go into detail a little bit, the general sign up for the Conservation Reserve Program is a yearly program, and it provides yearly rental payments for farmers who maintain conservation acres for contracts from 10 or 15 years. In exchange for a yearly rental payment, farmers remove environmentally sensitive land from agricultural production, and they plant cover crops and species that will improve environmental health, control soil erosion, improve water quality, and enhance wildlife habitat on cropland. Next slide. One of the programs also that is very popular in Illinois is the seedings is the pollinator habitat, and that is under the Continuous Conservation Reserve Program. The continuous sign up does not have a competitive evaluation process like the general sign up. General sign up is always like for a certain period of weeks every year. And with the continuous sign up, that goes yearly. And it also has a contract period of 10 to 15 years. But with the continuous, it generally targets small environmental sensitive acreages And one of these favorite practices is the pollinator habitat, as you can see on the picture that I've displayed there. Next slide, please. Another program is the Grassland CRP program. This allows producers and landowners to continue grazing and haying practices while protecting grasslands and promoting plant and animal biodiversity and conservation. Grasslands enrolled in CRP help sequester carbon in vegetation and soil while enhancing resilience to drought and wildfire. Meanwhile, producers can still conduct common grazing practices such as haying, mowing, or harvesting seed from the enrolled land, and that supports the ag production as well. Next slide. Then we have the Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program, or we call it CREP. Like Mary had said earlier, we have a whole lot of acronyms, but in this particular program, it is a program that has easements involved. And it's a component of the USDA Farm Service Agency's Conservation Reserve Program that is a public-private partnership program allowing states, tribal governments, nonprofit, and private entities to partner with FSA to implement CRP practices that address high-priority conservation and environmental objectives. The easements are anywhere from 15 years in addition to the 15-year CRP contract, so it would be a total of 30 years. Next slide, please. Then we have the CRP Clear 30, and that stands for Clean Lakes, Estuaries, and Rivers, and that is for a 30-year contract. That's hence why we have the Clear 30. It provides long-term water quality benefits by authorizing FSA to re-enroll small targeted environmentally sensitive acreage into a 30-year contract. Next slide. And lastly, we have the Forest Management Incentive Program. This provides, under the 2018 Farm Bill, financial assistance to CRP participants with existing tree covers to engage in management activities that improve forest resource condition and promote forest management and enhance wildlife habitat. There are additional programs that we have, and those will be provided in your PowerPoint handout that will be sent to you. If you want to go through all the programs, if you have any questions, please let us know. We at the Farm Service Agency are always willing to help our producers and landowners. Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy. Yeah, this is pretty dense here. So let's go to Grant, talking about the Soil and Water Conservation Districts. Grant is leading the Illinois chapters. So please go ahead, Grant. We'll pull up your PowerPoint.
Absolutely. I'll give it just a moment to get that PowerPoint going. All right, there we go. Good evening. My name is Grant Hammer. I'm the Executive Director of the Association of Illinois Soil and Water Conservation Districts. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the role of soil and water conservation districts and kind of the scheme of things. And realizing not everyone's from Illinois, I've got a couple slides on Illinois programs, and I'll just touch on those briefly. Can we go to the next slide, please? Okay, I'm going to start off with a quote from Hugh Hammond Bennett. For those that don't know, Hugh Hammond Bennett was around in the 1930s, kind of that Dust Bowl era. He was the founder of the U.S. Soil Conservation Service. If you have a discerning eye, you can see over Mary's left shoulder a photo of Hugh Hammond Bennett there in her office. But Hugh says, from every conceivable angle, economic, social, cultural, public health, natural defense, the conservation of natural resources is an objective on which all should agree. I just really like that quote and I use it often. Can we go to the next slide, please? So just to kick things off, I'm going to give you a little bit of background on soil and water conservation districts. I do want to pause for a second. As Mary noted, there are conservation districts in every state, all 50 states, all across the country. In Illinois, we call them soil and water conservation districts. Other states, we just call them conservation districts. Soil and water conservation districts work to protect Illinois' greatest assets, the rich, fertile soils and water resources of the state through strategic conservation efforts. We support the mantra, clean water, healthy soils. Next slide, please. SWCDs have for decades played a central role in efforts to sustain the viability of Illinois' natural resources for future generations by working with agriculture and environmental stakeholders alike. We've got a 75+ year track record of getting conservation on the ground on privately owned lands. I like to jokingly refer to us as the Switzerland of the conservation world. We work with the ag industry, we work with the environmental industry, and with the intent of getting conservation accomplished. Next slide, please. Just some more background to understand what Soil and Water Conservation District is. It is a unit of local government. They're here in Illinois, they're non-taxing, non-regulatory, volunteer-led units of local government. Our directors across Illinois serve unpaid, and what they do at the most base level is they help set local conservation policies within the counties that they reside. Next slide, please. In Illinois and in general across the country, conservation districts support voluntary, locally led strategies that further the adoption of conservation practices. And we believe a strong research, information, and education program is key to a long-term voluntary conservation effort. Next slide, please. I jokingly like to refer to Soil and Water Conservation District as the Swiss Army knife. We're considered the multi-purpose tool in the toolbox for the delivery of state and federal conservation programs in Illinois. Next slide. This network of SWCDs represent local infrastructure for the delivery of state and federal conservation programs in Illinois. SWCDs with a presence in every county are go-to for program delivery. You know, that's one of the strengths of the Soil and Water Conservation District. They are locally led by volunteers, county-based. Oftentimes they're local producers or environmentalists, and they have a good understanding of the natural resource concerns of their specific area. And again, that just kind of underscores the locally led component of this. Can we go to the next slide, please? Okay, just some quick areas of focus. Districts provide a wide range of services. You can see them there: flood prevention, erosion control, habitat restoration, sediment control, forestry management, and miscellaneous land use services. As we know, the prevention of soil and nutrients and pollutants from entering waterways helps maintain water quality and ultimately will reduce the need for costly remedial actions. Next slide, please. I really like this slide. I have to remind people, you know, Illinois is a peculiar state in that we have a lot of the state is a rural state. And then we have some very large urban areas like the city of Chicago and its surrounding suburbs. And we have to remind folks that we're not just here for farmers. We work all across the state in various settings. Today's SWCDs serve a variety of non-traditional audiences, you know, municipal officials, developers, and a whole new client group, suburban homeowners. All those different groups combined have an impact on water quality, and we attempt to work with everyone. I would also like to note, you know, when I give the spiel that we're not just here for agriculture and so forth. If you look at the soil and water conservation districts across the state of Illinois, if I'm talking to a suburban lawmaker, just outside of the city of Chicago, I'm going to remind that person that the districts in his area may be working to prevent pollutants and an excess of water entering a water system due to new construction, whereas in the most southern portion of the state, the Soil and Water Conservation District might be serving a traditional clientele like producers and so forth, but they may be doing more forestry type programs. So it's not just for farmers. Next slide, please. Okay, I'm going to touch on just a couple programs here. The main program is the Partners for Conservation program. Again, another acronym, it's PFC. But the Partners for Conservation program is a long-term state-supported initiative to protect natural resources and enhance outdoor recreational opportunities in Illinois. The program implements strategies for maintaining the viability of Illinois soil and water resources into the 21st century and beyond. This was kind of a landmark program here in Illinois. It was first introduced in the early 1990s. Don't quote me, I want to say 1991. It was a $100 million effort. It was a bipartisan effort. And since that time has had great success. Next slide, please. Okay, so you're wondering what the Partners for Conservation program funds. It provides funding for conservation practices. The Conservation Practices Cost Share Program, the Stream Bank Stabilization and Restoration Program, and the Soil and Water Conservation District Grant Program, in which Illinois conservation districts receive their funding. And then at the bottom there, you'll see sustainable agriculture, system of farming designed to balance environmental and economic concerns. Go to the next slide, please. Okay, this next slide are just some of the eligible practices under the conservation, the Partners for Conservation Cost Share Program. Sorry, it can be a mouthful at times. Conservation practices such as terraces, filter strips, grass waterways, and other practices, all aimed at reducing soil loss, are eligible for this program. How it works is that the Illinois Department of Agriculture distributes the funding for this program to Illinois soil and water conservation districts, which then, with their local knowledge of issues, helps to set priorities and fund those projects. Don't quote me, I can't remember off the top of my head right now where that cost share amount is, but this program will fund anywhere between 60 to 70% of the cost of a specific project. And I was pleased to hear that, I can't remember if it was Paul or Kevin, one of them touched on a few of these different practices on their own farms. Next slide, please. Another important program is the Stream Bank Stabilization and Restoration Program. As we know, stream bank erosion decreases the depth and holding capacity of lakes and reservoirs and reduces stream channel capacity, which increases the likelihood of flooding. And as we know, excessive flooding degrades water quality and damages fish and wildlife habitat. Next slide, please. The program monies fund demonstration projects that provide cost share assistance to landowners with severely eroding stream banks. This is very similar to the previous cost share program that I mentioned as well. So essentially, a landowner, a producer, whomever can come and apply for funding to mitigate some severe erosion. Next slide, please. Okay, fun part. Why are SWCDs important? SWCDs implement strategies that reduce the potential for costly flooding and protect water quality by controlling erosion and sedimentation. SWCDs help make Illinois more resilient to changing weather and climate. As we know, weather is becoming wetter and more severe. Next slide, please. Why it matters. Data trends suggest that Illinois is becoming more precipitous, which creates more erosion, which in turn diminishes water quality. Illinois SWCs are working to build resilience to more erratic, precipitous, and severe weather, as well as longer periods of drought in between. And I don't know if you've seen the news lately, but St. Louis is not very far from my home. It's about an hour and a half, and they're experiencing some pretty devastating flooding right now. It's sad to see. Next slide, please. I think Mary touched on this, or perhaps it was Wendy, but one of the items I want to touch on just briefly is a major policy question here in Illinois and in the Midwest, the Mississippi River watershed, and that's nutrient loss or nutrient leaching. Here in Illinois, our state efforts to reduce nutrient loss from urban and rural sources is called the nutrient loss reduction strategy. And it guides state efforts to improve water quality at home and downstream by reducing nitrogen and phosphorus levels in our lakes, streams, and rivers. As I'm sure this group knows, every farm ditch, every sewer, every gutter, all flows into something, which flows into something else, which flows into something else. And then here in the Mississippi River watershed, most of that empties into the Mississippi River and washes downstream. Next slide, please. This is just a quick image of the impacts downstream. The Gulf of Mexico dead zone is primarily caused by nutrient runoff from urban and rural areas throughout the Mississippi River watershed. Astoundingly, the 2021 Gulf of Mexico dead zone is approximately 6,334 square miles, or equivalent to more than 4 million acres of habitat. Go ahead and go to the next slide. I'll pick my thoughts up at the next slide. Here in Illinois, SWCDs are the boots on the ground, leading the local efforts to implement the nutrient loss reduction strategy and improve water quality at home. Nutrient runoff poses threats to public health, harms aquatic wildlife, and diminishes recreational opportunities such as fishing, boating, and swimming. I always like to joke, it's imperative to protect the water quality. There's for numerous reasons. One economic reason is that's a heck of a lot less 6-packs and Slim Jims sold at the lake in the summertime. If you can't swim, if you can't boat, if you can't fish and recreate, that's an issue here. That wraps it up for me. I hope this was insightful for you, and I'll look forward to questions later.
Yeah, thank you, Grant. Okay, can Paul and Kevin please join me at the next step here? What we wanted to do is have our farmers engage in a hypothetical scenario where we are taking over a highly degraded farmland and now need to consider what are the steps required to restore soil and water back to health. Let's say you have a chance to create a plan and all the resources you need. Where would you start and how would you progress? So why don't we start with Paul on that one?
Sure, thanks, Klaus. That's a great question. Because it happens, and that's actually our focus, is try to get people to be involved in engaging in regenerative agriculture. So for me, my focus is going to be around that concept of soil health. And we're going to be working on things like no-tilling the land. We're going to want to get started with cover crops right away on it, probably similar to what I do, try to make sure there's a lot of crops in the rotation so that we're using a diversity. We would also want to look at maybe zoning that field out so we know what resource areas, depending upon how big the land is, might need special attention. We can manage the nutrients like nitrogen application better by zoning out the field. We could identify areas that are low productivity, similar to what we've done on our own farm, where we've enrolled those into CRP or put some other buffering, used other programs to put them into permanent vegetation like grasslands instead of cropping them if they're not going to be profitable. And we could look at perhaps there might be some areas that would even be appropriate for tree production or things like that. And what I would look for out of that is by putting that together in 3 to 5 years or so, we should start seeing the soil improve so that we can get better water retention. We'll get nutrient cycling going on in the soil. We'll have more biological activity and all those good things that center around soil health. So my focus would be on soil health.
Okay, so it's about 3 to 5 years, you're saying?
Just to see the first starts of the impacts, and then it's a continuous process from then on.
Yeah. Kevin, would you go ahead? What are you going to do?
Okay, well, yeah, you're gonna give me all the money I want, huh?
Well,
Okay, I'm ready for this. So my goals on taking on a highly degraded farm would be, well, there's the mantra: improve soil health, improve water quality, decrease soil erosion, and increase wildlife habitat. On a side note, I would mention that on our farm, I have counted 21 different mammals that make this their home. So that would be one of my goals also. So I would begin with an evaluation of the soil types, the soil slope, whether it's erosive or not, the microclimates such as wetlands, water availability and retention. You'd have to look at your latitude, your weather patterns, and also your marketing possibilities for the crops that you're going to plant. So with this and other data, I would develop a plan for what crops I'm going to plant. And also, I would be thinking about what practices I'm going to use. In my introduction, I mentioned we already are doing no-till, cover crops, and crop rotation. Other practices that I would consider would be windbreaks, grassed waterways, riparian buffers, field borders, irrigation drainage systems, wetland reestablishment, biofilters, terraces, and other projects, other practices. So all of this takes time. I have unlimited money, so that's not a problem, and effort. I would need professional support to develop a long-range plan, and I would look to the state and federal agencies for their support, as well as non-governmental agencies. So in a nutshell, that's my plan. Thank you.
so what I hear you say is basically this is highly customized, right? I mean, you could probably have 2 farms sitting right next to each other, and you would have different microclimates, different slopes, different sun exposure, different water access, and so on. So it's really a highly customized program. Is that a fair observation there?
Yeah, I think even within a neighborhood, and some of it's going to be management capability and practice interests. For example, I rent out hay land and pasture land on our farm. Cattle aren't my interest, but I know the land is best used for cattle. So some of those kinds of things come into play. I do want to clarify just one thing for the listeners, and that is, while you said unlimited money, most of the government programs that we enroll in are cost share programs. So Kevin laid out a nice list there, but if it costs $1 million to do that, the farmer might be responsible for $500,000 or $600,000 of that. And so part of the process of using government programs and is structuring that in, because you can do a lot of nice things, but you do have to put in a little of your own money. There's some skin in the game for the farmer here. It's not just a handout for most of these programs. And I personally consider that a good thing, because it makes it you have to justify it as the expense as something that's going to provide a return or a benefit to your farm.
Yeah. Yeah, so what, I mean, there's a lot of moving parts here, but it starts with a plan, right? I mean, so you have this unique approach of evaluating types and condition of your soil, your climate, your water, and so on, and market considerations. Who are you going to sell your crop to? So how do you go about building this plan? I mean, what kind of resources are there available? Maybe we'll bring Wendy, Mary, and Grant into the conversation. Can be yeah, great. So what resources are available if you start from scratch, right? And there's probably a lot of farms out there that are depleted and that are in need of a more rapid transformation. So how do you go about this? What kind of resources are there in the planning stage?
Well, I'll get started. So this is my favorite part of the job, and that's conservation planning. Is we pull that soil survey out, the ecological sites descriptions, land use capabilities, where the risks are for nutrient loss, where your groundwater is, what issues you might have in your nearby water systems, and then what you, the farmer and ranchers' interests are and objectives. Like Paul said, a lot of it has to do with the type of community you're in, but neighbor to neighbor, you might have a neighbor that likes the cattle and wants to see a lot of grassland, and then you've got the rotation of lots of different crops, and sometimes you have the whole thing. So it starts with that plan. It really is a lot of data of what's available to somebody who's got this brand new piece of land. And I like to look at the soils. The soils tells me a lot. And then I can use that to help you as a planner. And whether it's me or whether it's from the soil and water conservation districts, we have a lot of conservationists out there that kind of understand that 9-step conservation plan. Once we have that in order, what your crop rotation is, whether you're willing to incorporate soil cover crops, if you have an erosion concern and we need to take care of that, if you're going to plant trees, all of that can be put in a plan, and we can help you schedule that. And hopefully we don't tell you, oh, let's all do it the first year, because that would not be very nice to you, because each of these practices takes time. And if you are, unlike Paul and Kevin, who have experience, many farmers buy this property and they don't have that experience with implementing their own regenerative system. And so there is some learning curves there too. Once we do that, that's when programs like EQIP come into play, environmental quality incentive programs, where we help cost share the first couple years of cover crops, or that erosion control practice, or that windbreak. And then what we like to do over time is, as you get those practices that help you manage implemented, such as livestock pipelines, if you need watering systems for range, for cattle rotations, once those get in place and you start managing well, then there's something called Conservation Stewardship Program, which helps those producers that are really doing the best of the best to go a little bit farther. Take that next step, that next expensive risk, that I call it a risk, as you change management systems. And then you bring in the easement programs along with what type of soils they have. You bring in CRP and all of the things Farm Service Agency has to support if you've got marginal lands, or if you've got some lands that need a little bit more care than just cover crops. Or salinity, or some other issue or risk there. So that's where I would begin. I would bring my team of conservationists to the table and help them walk through this plan.
Yeah, thank you, Mary.
And then
Wendy,
put them in touch with Grant and Wendy.
Yeah, Wendy, do you have some
Yes.
comments? Yeah, go ahead.
And to kind of go off of what Mary just explained, the payments that we issue a lot of times are determined based upon the soils types and the erodibility index of the property that you're working with. So if we usually, most of our programs will take the 3 predominant soil types of the area that you're talking about. For it, if it's an area of a waterway or if it's a pollinator habitat, depending on the size of the acreage. And then we do the 3 predominant soil types of that area and come up with the average soil rental rate. Those rates are determined from the National Statistics Service over a long period of time and are issued to each state every year
Yeah,
in each
thank
sign up.
you. Okay, Liz, we're running a tight schedule because I'd like to also bring in some Q&A, but Grant, you have some comments to add as well. You're muted.
Dang it, I'm that person who forgot to unmute. No, I would just add, you know, conservation is accomplished in a cooperative fashion. The soil and water conservation districts work very closely with their NRCS and FSA counterparts. They're most typically co-housed in a USDA field service center, and those offices are located, you know, near each other. That said, you know, someone seeking assistance or information about a program could walk into one of those service centers, you know, make a left to go to the soil and water office, make a right to go to the NRCS office, and go straight to go to FSA. Each one of those folks that staff those offices work, you know, again, cooperatively. The soil and water office typically employs a resource conservationist, and that's somebody with some technical experience that can, you know, advise in a more technical sense on the, you know, parameters of a certain project. NRCS also employs a district conservationist as well. And those two collaborate to find a program that fits the person who's interested.
Okay. Yeah, so it's an endless topic because clearly funding is an issue, right? Because the feedback we're getting is that the conversion rate is not high because funding is maybe not at the level where we would like it to see. But maybe we'll cap that towards the later part. Can I bring Nosheen on? Because we also wanted to swing into the world of volunteering to see what can we actually do. Tell us a little bit about what you do in the community, Nosheen.
All right. Well, as I mentioned before, I'm a volunteer for Sierra Club, and also I work with the Manitou Creek Watershed Alliance. And so what we're doing is we're focused on water and water quality. And Gloria Charland and I, so every week, every Wednesday, a group of teens, they come out to Long Lake. And what we do is we teach them how to test water samples, how to collect water samples from the lake, and then test for toxins and how to identify algal blooms. So one of the main things I feel like it's education and training youth, because, you know, like, it's like they're the future generation that's gonna actually, you know, make the change. And so educating the youth is very important. And also I work with a team at the Manitou Creek Watershed Alliance, and we're studying how beaver dams are actually beneficial for like water quality and how they can filter water, because we all know beavers are like the environmental engineers. And so that's pretty much what I'm doing right now. And along with all of that, I'm also a STEM teacher. I teach pre-K to 8th grade kids. And so when I'm teaching right now is summer camp, and we're outside located next to a swamp. And, you know, like the little kids, they come to me and they, you know, they're just so excited about the animals, like the aquatic life, but then they're like, we're polluting. So even kids nowadays, like they know that we're polluting our environment, and the water is essential for all life. And so we really need to just work hard in educating the youth and educating everyone to try to make a difference, to make a change.
What's the condition of the watershed that you're working on?
Well, yesterday we collected water and we did a test for microcystin, and it came out positive. So that was toxic in Long Lake. That was just one of the tests that we did. But what we see is that from like mid-June to now, there are a lot more blooms, and then that prevents you from going fishing, that prevents you from going kayaking, and it's sad because, I mean, who doesn't want to kayak and go fishing?
So what do you think about the potential to support farmers as a volunteer, as an environmentalist? How can we support farmers who are aligned, with a regenerative way of thinking?
Well, first off, definitely educate everyone in the youth. And also, because we're all in this together, we all humans and like other animals, everything, we all need water. We need, clean soil to grow food and stuff. So that's pretty much what we should do, is support all these farmers that are going to shift to regenerative farming, and they're really going to try and bring soil health back to like healthy soil and healthy environment.
Yeah. So Grant, you're working a lot with volunteers, right? How do volunteer groups interact with your organization?
Again, going back to the theme of conservation is achieved in a cooperative fashion. My state association and my member districts alike both work cooperatively with different various NGOs, and funding for conservation has, for the most part, been pretty scarce here in Illinois for a long time now, and as a result, you have to form partnerships and work collaboratively with other organizations to get things done. And that's done both at the state level and the local level, both.
Paul and Kevin, what is your experience working with the agencies from a ease of interacting to availability of funding?
Well, on our farm, I work very closely with the federal USDA, FSA, and NRCS agencies, as well as our county SWCD. Like Grant said, you walk in the door and they're all there at the same desk. So it's very easy to work with them. We also work with our State Department of Ag and our State Department of Natural Resources. And our Soil and Water Conservation District has a working relationship with several NGOs, including the Nature Conservancy, the Kellogg Foundation, Pheasants Forever, Prairie Rivers Network, the Eco-Justice Collaborative, Farm Bureau, just to name a few. So it takes everybody working together with clean water and healthy soils as the goal. And if that can be accomplished, then we can get a lot done with the Farm Bill.
So these groups are bringing funding to the table as well, beyond assisting in the design and development process. How does that work?
Well, for example, through our Soil and Water Conservation District, the Nature Conservancy and the Kellogg Foundation funded drainage control structures on our farm, which means that we can store the water and the cover crop and the nutrients through the winter. And then in the spring, when we want to plant, we let the water out of the field, and then we plant, and then we raise the water table again with baffles and store all the water through the summer. And then come harvest, we let the water out, we harvest, we plant our cover crops, we put the baffles back in, and we start storing water and nutrients all over again. So that's the Nature Conservancy and the Kellogg Foundation funded that. So thank you.
That's interesting. Paul, you're working in the carbon markets, right? I mean, it seems to me that these practices certainly regenerate the soil, but also bring carbon into the soil, and it should be quite measurable. I mean, is there any funding mechanism where the investment community understands that these are really carbon sequestration practices, just not called that way?
There's been quite a shift in the last couple of years in the corporate America understanding the importance of farms and what we're doing on it to their own profitability and to the long-term sustainability of our country. And so we see that in the carbon markets, there's a lot of interest in companies doing some offsets, and there's some problems with offset versus, cutting carbon. I understand all of that. But one of the things that it does, and this is why I support it, is in order to collect a carbon payment, you need to no-till and you need to be planting cover crops. And you also need to be doing nutrient management. Those are the three key things, at least in the Indigo Ag program, that gets started on cover crops. And those three things fit right into soil health, water quality, and all of the rest of the pieces. And so if by having a program like that, it gets somebody excited, they can get some payments per acre and use the QUIP program to get some funding to get started. Now the carbon payment becomes a bump on top of that, and maybe that's enough incentive to get somebody to move forward. And so I've supported it just for that process of getting more farmers interested. Creates a little buzz, and it gets reported in all the farm magazines. Not everything NRCS does or other USDA agencies do get written up in successful farming all the time, but this whole carbon thing has been in all the farm journals for a while, and that's the kind of stuff that finally penetrates the farmer psyche, is that other farmers are doing it, and so they want to be a part of it too.
Yeah. Paul and I were in a previous panel discussion that I moderated focused on the Growing Climate Solutions Act. And we discussed the need for farmers to get money up front because it takes time to see the benefits of shifting into regenerative practices. By the time you get a premium for your crop, or you're reducing your chemical inputs and so on, you become more profitable, but it takes maybe 3 to 5 years. So that goes beyond our discussion today, but it just seems to be really worthwhile exploring that further, because to me, here's an existing infrastructure. There's over 3,000 locations working inside the community. But anyway, we're deviating.
I can just add in real quick, Klaus, so just the rest of the part. On our tour yesterday, we had 2 major corporate companies involved in the food chain who came into our regenerative tour yesterday, and both of them are working on how they can work with regenerative farmers to bring our products into their food system. So it's starting to happen, and they're doing that at a premium for the farm. That's a good thing.
And one very important part is the engagement of the general public demanding these kinds of products, obviously. So do you have this demand and generally, you hear that there is a great lack of regeneratively grown products in the marketplace. So to shift into this transition seems to be the right thing to do. So can we go to our team for Q&A? What kind of questions do we have that we should get into? Who is going to start? Anne, is that you?
Yes, thanks, Klaus. So we have some questions that have been upvoted, so I'll start there. From Donald, regenerative agriculture practices are a cost-effective, natural solution to solving the climate crisis. The fastest solution for farmers to help is using cover crops and no-till. How can we help the USDA to get the Agriculture House and Senate committee members to provide more incentive to farmers and ranchers to implement regenerative ag practices in the 2023 Farm Bill?
Good. Funding. Yeah, I mean, that was bound to come up. Yeah, I mean, one reason why we're doing this here is to inform and educate, right? Because, I mean, when you think about the Farm Bill, that's a monstrosity. There's so many moving parts inside the Farm Bill. So you can't just say, give us more money for the Farm Bill. So we have to be very specific. And the purpose of our conversation today was to point out the kinds of programs that are really highly specialized in assisting farmers, but they are maybe underfunded and under-resourced. So who wants to pick up on that? Okay.
I will add that in our county, concerning the CSP program and the EQIP program, of all those farmers that applied, basically only a third of them were approved for funding because the money ran out. So just those two programs specifically, if they were fully funded to the demand, would do a lot. That's all.
Yeah, I'd agree. We run out of funding in North Dakota for those two programs as well. And so when people are, if they're looking for words to use when they're talking with their Congress people, those two, EQIP and CSP, would be two that they could certainly tack into their memory and use. And as far as how to get involved doing that, many of the congressmen, particularly those on the Ag Committee, are holding hearings this summer because the Farm Bill process is already underway. And so if there's a hearing in their community, or maybe they got to drive 50 or 100 miles to get to one, they should show up, because there's usually, a lot of times it's kind of staged with panelists, but sometimes there's an opportunity to ask questions. And the other thing for organizations to do is contact that congressperson, whether it's senator or representative, ahead of time and say, can we be one of the people who are invited to speak at the meeting? And usually they'll have, 5, 10, 15, 20 people speak, and they're each allotted 3 to 5 minutes, but you have to be on the agenda ahead of time. You can't just show up. And so it would be good for organizations that are interested in the Farm Bill and supporting these conservation programs that aren't the traditional Corn Growers Association, Soybean Growers Association, to start showing up at Farm Bill hearings, because as Grant and others have pointed out, this is a bill for everybody. It's called the Farm Bill, but it's a bill for our entire country, and the taxpayers support us as farmers. And I for one, am incredibly indebted to the taxpayer support we've gotten through the years in the conservation programs. And that's part of my motivation. I want to give back. I want to do a good job. But people can get involved that way. They should.
Yeah. Now, Grant, how are you doing? How are but how are the conservation districts doing in general with staffing levels? I mean, I hear volunteers, but at the end of the day, people have to make a living, no matter how motivated they are. So how are the conservation districts equipped now with funding?
So I'm going to give you an Illinois specific answer because that's my expertise. But I will also say, in general, funding for conservation districts or soil and water conservation districts across the country is kind of a quilt patchwork per se. Every state varies in how they fund conservation districts in their state programs. Some have dedicated sources. Illinois does not have a dedicated source of funding. We're reliant on our general revenue fund, so just tax collections essentially. And that funding has, for the last 10, 15, 20 years, has continually declined. Now, that said, my state association and a number of partner stakeholder type groups have put together a really good effort these past couple of years and made a very strong case to Illinois lawmakers. And we actually saw a nice boost in funding these past 2 years, which we're immensely thankful for and grateful for. And we'll use that funding, judiciously and wisely to get conservation accomplished. That said, capacity is an issue. Staffing capacity and readiness. You know, as the general public becomes more knowledgeable or aware of you know, issues that ultimately stem from changing weather, changing climate, they're looking for answers, they're looking for solutions. And I think, you know, I think the future, you're going to see new programs and you're going to see more funding. And I always reiterate to people that it's great to fund the programs. There's certainly a need there, as I think Paul said. I mean, there's overrun for programs. There's not enough funding to go around, but you also have to fund the people that implement the programs, especially at the local level.
Yeah, no, I mean, this is one key learning I had preparing for our discussion today, is that I wasn't aware, you know, first of all, the history of the conservation districts founded by Roosevelt under the Dust Bowl era there in the 30s, responding to a national emergency. And I would almost argue we have a national emergency looking today at the condition of our soil and water. And so this seems to be the most logical tool, right? I mean, it's ready to scale, it's out there.
Yes.
I mean, there's nothing comparable that I'm aware of that could compete with this. And you have the capacity to integrate private enterprise, right? I mean, you could contract, for example, for specific services. And by doing that, provide guidance and direction and, you know, and additional resources. So yeah, I think that is really worthwhile pursuing that conversation there.
Yeah, I've said for a while, it truly is an exciting time to be in conservation. Conservation districts origins lie in the Great Dust Bowl era, where soils from the plains were blowing across the country, and people are eating dinner in New York City, and they can taste soil from North Dakota.
Yeah.
That was the country's first major ecological challenge. And, I think we're entering a new era. There's a lot of interest in what conservation districts do. And I think the demand for services from the USDA, NRCS, and FSA and soil and water conservation districts is only going to continue to grow. We need to have the funding and the people in place to tackle the challenge.
Great pitch. Okay. Another question?
Sure. So we've got kind of a cluster of upvoted questions about CAFOs, concentrated animal feeding operations, if I have that right. And I am fortunate that our watershed doesn't have any. So I'm going to ask you a few questions, and maybe we can address this issue holistically. Are CAFOs the beneficiary of any of these programs? If so, which ones? Conservation practices are all well and good, but many of us feel that the environmental and watersheds can't support unchecked numbers of CAFOs, even if they were all to maximally implement voluntary conservation practices. CAFO size and density restrictions and moratoriums in impaired watersheds make sense. And finally, how can small and family farms compete against CAFOs, especially when they have an advantage over state legislators with campaign donations?
So CAFOs is a huge, huge topic, right? Because we're not just talking about CAFOs per se, but we would have to talk about meat markets in general, meat processing capacity, access to market, and so on. Lots and lots of issues. We are actually queuing up a discussion specifically focused on animal proteins, CAFOs and local meat markets and so on. So this is going to blow beyond the capacity of our conversation today, but Mary has her hand up, so go ahead.
Thank you. Yes, I'm not going to get into meat markets because we're focusing on water. I will talk about CAFOs just a little bit, confined animal feeding operations. And EPA, along with the state, has the responsibility for regulating CAFOs of a certain size. And what NRCS and FSA and districts do is we help those people that choose to have confined animal feeding operations to meet a standard that's acceptable by the state government or federal government EPA regulations. And so there are some fundings. If I have, I cannot help somebody get into compliance if they are out of compliance with an EPA or a state law. But if they are moving towards a regulation, for example, when they back in 20 years ago, when they first EPA said we're really going to expect CAFOs to have plans, NRCS stepped up, we trained people, and we helped write plans that prevented water quality issues. We built a lot of big ponds, you might say, with aerators and so forth, all trying to reduce the risk to the local water. If those are not working, it really is a state and EPA issue for CAFOs. I'm not going to, the producer, the landowner gets to choose how they make their business, and we will help them prevent the risk to the natural resource, if that helps.
Yeah, it is a huge topic, and there's Paul, do you have Kevin? Do you guys have any comments on that?
I really don't have any comments other than what Mary said.
Yeah. Sorry, but I think we're coming back to this question in our next webinar because there are just too many moving parts, and we wouldn't do this justice. I'm trying to answer this in 5 minutes, so sorry. But we'll definitely, it's high on our agenda to take a deep dive into this whole topic there and come back.
I would say that one of the interesting things the livestock folks have gotten put into some mandatory funding levels from EQIP. And my personal opinion, which I'll be lobbying for, is that there needs to be some mandatory funding levels for soil health as a carve out. Yeah, that's very specific to it, and that would at least help create a focus. And we've talked about some of the key pieces of that, but putting that as a mandatory funding part.
Yeah, I mean the Farm Bill is enormous, right? I mean it's comparable to the Defense Bill. There's so many moving parts in there, and so we wanted to focus on the conservation programs at this point specifically. So it's somewhat narrow. I apologize for that, but we'll definitely get back to this. So do we have another question?
Yes, thanks, Klaus. What would the panelists like to see in the new Farm Bill? Any new strategies, partners, or new measures of success?
That's a great question. So who's going to start on that one? Grant, we'll start with you on that one.
Oh, I knew you were going to do that to me.
Okay.
I mean, anything that supports soil health and water quality, you know, a lot of the federal programs, there's a lot of overlap. You know, upping the funding for those programs, bottom line is, you know, I think paramount. The state of Illinois programs are a little bit different. You know, I tend to defer to our national association, who's more of our national advocate. I'm more Illinois focused. But for a future webinar, I think it'd be a great idea to grab somebody from our national association. They can get more into the weeds on their efforts at the national level.
Okay. Kevin?
Well, since you're going to give me unlimited dollars, I'm going to give you unlimited ideas. First of all, I would like to see no acreage limits on the Conservation Reserve Program. Also, it was mentioned that in EQIP funding, a certain amount was allocated specifically for animal operations. And in some districts where there are no animal operations, you know, that just is money not going to good use. like I said before, only a third of the CSP and EQIP applicants are being funded. So I would like to see all of those applicants being funded. And then kind of a carrot before the horse scenario, I'd like to see some considering farm insurance, some money going to that for farmers who implement certain conservation practices. So those are just 4 ideas.
Thanks. Mary?
I can't lobby, and I'm not. If you want to ask for more money and you want to ask for it in a certain way, that is certainly your prerogative. But I would ask for 2 things: is make it simple and remember locally led. That is powerful. If soil health is what you can convince your community and your soil conservation district that you need to be working on, I don't need to be told through the Farm Bill that's what I need to focus on, because all state conservationists are listening to you locally, and that's where we want to put our funding. When we parse it out into bits, it's like throwing a paintball at the wall, or a water balloon full of paint, and you get this splatches, which is like random acts of conservation all across the landscape. But when you focus on locally led, when you have a community, a soil conservation district saying, we've got these animal waste people doing things and we like them in our community, but they're putting our water at risk. Okay, we can help figure out how we can reduce the risk to the water quality with programs and incentives to help those people do it voluntarily. So remember, locally led, that is powerful. And then simplify. Paul, I would love to sit down over an adult beverage sometime and talk about how all these different fundings, how we split it for wildlife, we split it for this, but you give me the funds and you let my planners plan with the community about that local resource concern, whether it's water quality, soil health, air quality, that's where we need to focus the funding, because that's where we'll be successful. And there's a lot of money. When I started my career, we were a $900,000 agency. We are now well over 4 billion. And with all of the recent funding through some of the acts, there's money out there. And my ask would, let's focus it where the risk is, where the nutrient problems could be. So I'm done off my soapbox, because again, I'm not lobbying one way or the other. I love the Farm Bill. It tells me, and it has been very powerful. And I did notice a question that I will go ahead and answer. It talks about politics and a change of administration. And yes, the Farm Bill and every secretary, every chief for my agency affects me a little bit. But at the end of the day, this Farm Bill pretty much has a conservation title in it. And whether it's called EQIP or Great Plains, we've had conservation in it. And I don't anticipate that that's going to change too much, regardless of politics and who's in the administration, because everybody seems to care about natural resources in some sort of fashion. So hopefully I answered that question too.
No, this is really good. I would just add that I would love to see a way to channel private investments or carbon offsets and investments of that sort into these groups as well. Now, that just seems there are so much money chasing opportunities to do well, right? To do good, and that definitely is a wise way to invest. I would suggest. Right, Paul, you're agreeing with me on that, I guess, right?
Yeah, I did want to touch on a couple of things. It kind of follows along with Mary's locally led. I mentioned the cover crop project that we did in northeastern North Dakota. That was a resource concern, and it was made up of 10 conservation districts and our RC&D council. And then we brought in private partners as well. And so that was that RCPP program is a good one to create some local focus, involve districts, and bring some outside dollars. You know, Pheasants Forever could get involved in something like that, or Ducks Unlimited, and any number of other groups. The other thing people should have their antennas up for, there's an act called the Sustains Act that's been proposed by a Republican member of the House Ag Committee. And that one is going to allow corporate funding, donations to be put into a fund and USDA to match them. And it follows along very similar to what the National Wildlife Foundation has, where corporations can donate to specific projects, or they could be not-for-profit. Sierra Club could be a donor as well. And by doing that, they could guide where the dollars, pick some targeted areas and prioritize them and focus on it. So there's some things out there that we can do.
Definitely. We're totally out of time. Randy, go ahead.
I just wanted to mention there was a couple of questions in regards to beginning farmers, undeserved farmers, and we do have several programs out there that are specifically targeted for those people, socially disadvantaged. So please reach out to your farm service agencies. There's plenty of funding there for those types of individuals, or reach out to me personally.
Yeah, there are programs, and probably same issue that we need to know what these programs are, and then we can go ask for funding them. I think the whole point of lobbying for funding is that we need to be very specific what we're asking for. And so that may have been the missing link, which is the reason why we're doing these conversations here now, to educate ourselves on it. I see a question from John Rulak. John, I'm sorry, I think we're just flat out of time, but we will cover that question in our next discussion, I promise. So we're coming to an end here. And first of all, I want to thank our panel for really an informative discussion. Thank you so much for preparing. Thank you particularly for educating me, getting ready for this panel discussion to moderate it. I think we have to hardly scratch the surface here, so we'll have to continue. Thank you to Gloria and Ann from the Illinois chapter of the Sierra Club for organizing and hosting the event, for the amazing tech support we got from Pam and Lan, from the Illinois Eco-Justice Collaborative, who volunteered to do the tech for us here, and to Lisa from the Natural Resources Conservation Service, who helped us so much with the panel selection. So thank you all for your participation. We'll be sending out the video shortly. Please stay in touch, and we will continue to raise topics related to the Farm Bill, as we go forward for the year. With that, thank you so much. Goodbye, everyone.